Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, your friendly neighborhood Christian whistleblower, and I rarely know what day it is, but when I'm on the air with you this early, I know it's Sunday because we're here with our Wayne Steiger for not your normal Sunday morning show. Hey, Wayne, how are you? How's everything out west?
I'm doing great, Getting ready for winter time.
Yeah, we'll be all the way down in the 60s here by midweek.
Well, I'm telling you, get the parkas out, buddy.
Cold snap, and I tell you, it has got the water's too cold at the beach. I can't enjoy the morning swim anymore.
Wow, what do you do?
Well, I just go and do my stuff and then come back home.
Well,
just don't go in the water.
You got the beach.
Got the beach, absolutely. It still looks nice.
You always have the beach.
Definitely. Indeed. So you're just telling me that you got a nice letter from someone.
Yeah. We're over on my channel. We're doing a number of programs on the pseudo-apocrypha.
Crestone, Colorado. Someone's here.
Oh, how you doing? On the book of the life of Adam and Eve. And I'm about to do the apocalypse of Adam. And I am really quite taken with how many people, Jeff, are really into these books. And,
great.
You know, as I said, I had one subscriber send me a 4-page email, which I'll be responding back to. But it has people, I think, coming to some rather serious questions. And I have one for you.
Uh-oh.
Right here off at the morning.
I might have to just say, might have to just take the Fifth Amendment, you know.
Well, you know, or have another cup of coffee. So we know the creation story of Adam and Eve, right? So as we have been reading in the life of Adam and Eve, this is after the expulsion of the garden. And so the narrative picks up as to how life was for these two creatures. The first thing we found out, Adam had no desire for sex. None. To him, it was having sex with himself, where the thought with Eve was concerned.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm there with you yet, but I know what you're saying, and it's very interesting.
All right, so here's the question for you. Did Eve have the breath of life breathed into her?
Well, see, I have a different take on it. The way I read Genesis is that in Genesis 1:26 and 27, humans were created as Elohim. Was mom Elohim, dad Elohim, baby Elohim. We were created as Elohim, Elohim in training, if you will. We're yet learning and growing and learning how to manifest all of our Elohim qualities. So they were essentially spirit beings. And then in Genesis chapter 2, the being that I call the rat bastard, or Lord, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever you want to call him, he actually, seeing that they were wanting to manifest the fullness of Elohim nature, which included manifesting in physical bodies, he created out of the dust of the earth what I call mud hut bodies, these things, fake bodies, conned them into them. And I think the Hebrew says that his bodies were dead until a spirit entered into them. And I think those spirits that entered in were who we would think of as Adam and Eve, and we've been trapped ever since.
Okay, and so I can extrapolate that and add it to where I'm forming my foundation is that the Genesis 1:26 people were unique. They had total, it would have seemed that their creation was by the one.
Good morning, Preshni. Really? Okay.
Well, because think about this. Genesis 1 is a different God. I think it's the creator.
I would say at this point it's the Elohim because of it is Elohim in Genesis 1:1.
All right, so taking then the premise going forward.
But I agree it's two different gods. It's the Elohim in Genesis 1. It's the Lord himself fallen in Genesis 2.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what I've done in the research, and I never thought about this. Apparently she did not.
She didn't have the breath of life blown into her?
No.
You're going to have a lot of ladies upset with you over that one, Wayne.
I didn't write it.
Sometimes, my friend, It doesn't matter.
Listen, one of the things that we're finding, good, it's a good point, in the book of Adam and Eve is that Eve got screwed,
Good
literally.
morning, Davy from Scotland.
Hey, Davey, how you doing? Literally and figuratively. This creature, um, it's a travesty. That's all I got to say. I mean, this creature was used right from the very beginning, but it's kind of a different story. So I wrote
Speaking
this,
of Eve.
speaking of Eve.
Mm-hmm.
So how about injecting a different point of view? And here is the different point of view. Think about Adam's perspective. Adam, according to the book of Adam and Eve, was created as a god. He was actually brought up to heaven by Michael, and all the angels were forced to worship Adam. Now, God called Adam Yahweh. Yahweh Adam. That's what he called him. And the only one that refused to worship was Satan. And Satan,
And you're in the Apocrypha now, right?
in the Apocrypha, in the Apocrypha. And at that point, in fact, there's a conversation with Satan and Adam. They had been kicked out of the garden. There is no food. They don't have any food. In fact, their bodies were not actually meant to eat the food outside of paradise. So there had to be a alteration made in order for these creatures to exist outside of this physical place called paradise. That was their first problem. Adam decides to repent, and Eve says, "What's repentance?" And so Adam has to explain it to her, and she says, "But, wait a minute, it's my fault. Listen, I was the one." Here's what's interesting.
Who said that it was their fault?
It was Eve. Eve took the full blame. Now, in the Apocrypha, guess what? Adam and Eve were separated in the garden. Adam had the east and to the south. Eve had the west to the north.
Yeah, that kind of feeds into me to the whole Pauline blaming it all on the woman thing. And does Lilith figure into the story that you're reading in the Apocrypha?
No, but it's very interesting because Eve is not the first female.
Even in the story you're reading, the Apocrypha?
Yeah, she's not the first. She's the first womb man, womb of the man. Now, let me finish out on Adam. I think Adam was pissed because, see, Adam was created as a god. In fact, in the Apocrypha, as Eve and Seth are walking to paradise to try to get this oil, Adam's dying. He's got every disease imaginable on him. And so they're looking for this oil from a tree in paradise. And Seth comes up on the lion and a snake. And he says, "You are to bow down to me. I am the image of God." And it's a very odd. So think about this. Adam's being created. Now, these gods intervene. It's always they. They call them they. They're the others in their image. So they make him, out of him, a female. They don't breathe the same breath of life into her. They share it because of Adam. Adam is God. He was created as a God, which would go into your thinking. Why? Something happened. Something happened where whoever it's said in the Genesis stories, they created him in their image. Whoever they are, and of course theology has speculated on who they are for eternity, for as long as we've been here. So could it be that there is in fact a war that Satan refused to fall for this worship? He told Adam, he said, "I'm not going." He says, "If anything, Adam, you should be worshiping me because I was created before you and I was created above you." So I could see where Adam could in fact be kind of pissed. He was perfect. He was a god. Anyway, thought?
I think it's an interesting story. It doesn't line up with my understanding of Genesis, just a strictly textual understanding, but it's certainly interesting and it's worth pondering because, I mean, they're all stories. They're all interpolations are all interpretations. So who can say, one's right or the other? I would say that what you're saying doesn't line up strictly with what's revealed in Genesis, but that's
Well,
neither here nor there, really.
well, actually, it is, because Genesis, particularly up to the first 15 chapters, was never written by the same author who did the latter part of Genesis. Now,
I'd agree with that.
also, I give to you as evidence that this story may have more foundation than what's been given credence to it. Otherwise, there's no reason to have included it into the Apocrypha to begin with. But my challenge to this is, how do you deal with the Chaldean record? And
What do you mean?
the Chaldean, there is the book that you can actually call, it's called the Chaldean account of Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually where the story of Genesis came from. It was from the Chaldean text.
Yeah, I agree. The Genesis account was, if we're going to be nice, we'll say loosely borrowed. If we're going to be realistic, we'll say plagiarized from several other earlier accounts.
Yeah. And in that story, because when I found it, I consumed it like, it was good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It brought into the whole story for me that there's a counterintelligence out there. Well, I just think of that. That's a pretty good point. And it's like I keep on thinking, Jeff, we are really in the middle of something that I don't think we have any idea about.
I wouldn't doubt that at all. I would not doubt that at all. There's definitely a great cosmic conflict. We agree on that. We may disagree on some of the particulars of the players, but I definitely agree we're in a cosmic conflict, and we're either caught in the middle or we don't realize whose side we're really on.
Exactly. Now, I'm not saying that, as I have contended, the problem I have with Christianity, the only way Christianity works is that it has to have an antithesis to it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, the story doesn't play out. And if Sir Francis Bacon did his job right, which I believe he did, I think he created a beautiful play from what he actually had to work with. And by that, I mean, we could see, particularly in much of this being played out in many of Shakespeare's plays. Always remarkable that if he was, in fact, the one who did the final edit on the King James Bible, then we would see the reflection of his DNA, his handprint, on how the translation came out that has been accepted today into all Christian ideology.
Well, there's no doubt that Bacon had the text for at least a year, possibly more, before it was published, and he was the last person to touch it. He had it for a whole year working on it, doing who knows what, but that it was in the exclusive possession of Francis Bacon for a year.
Well, and what most people don't realize, the king, James, was not all that bright. He really wasn't.
A lot of people think he was a dullard.
Well, we know this. He had a strong foundation in the occult.
He, at least a very strong interest, that's for sure.
Well, he did write a book, right?
He wrote like this one right here, Demonology,
the
by
Demonology.
King James I.
Yeah, and it's quite a read.
It's a very interesting read. It's a little hard to read, but it's interesting.
He clearly was paranoid. I mean, this dude, folks, if you haven't read the book, just a little background on the authorized version of the King James. And anytime you see that authorized, those royalties are going to the royal family. But I digress. The fact is that the guy really thought that he was in a personal fight with Satan. He really did. And I find it very interesting that when you have leaders like that become so convinced that they are, in fact, the champion of their particular religion or cause, how it influences. And it influences us today.
Interesting. Davy used to live in Stratford upon Avon.
There you go. And you know, if you know the story of what happened when the young king went to go meet his wife, as they were coming back from Denmark, I believe, they were in a storm and almost killed them, shipwrecked them. And the king swore it was demons that had been cast onto them by witches.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the main reasons for, he went to college there, did Davy. One of the main reasons for the King James Version itself was the unambiguous presentation of the divine right of kings.
Mm-hmm. Which I don't think like that. Does anyone else?
I don't think so.
I don't think like that. I mean, technically, I know this. I'll share this with you. So anytime you see the president or the vice president, when they are on a podium, notice the flag behind them. They will always be represented by a gilded flag.
You mean it has the gold around the edges of it?
Mm-hmm. Because that's admiralty. It's maritime. And there is no higher ranking in any military worldwide than that of, and I think in our case, it would be a 5-star, 5-rated admiral. And it goes to show you when we talk about the King's Law, this is part of the King's Law. The reason why the president stands there, he stands as a representative of the military.
Yeah, I've always heard that. I never got much into it, to be frank with you.
Well, I did. I was at one time a member of a very elite political group, and
Right.
you study those things. Listen, I had the best. I told you the best education I had on constitutional law was from Ed Meese, the general, and so these things are important. Although most Americans completely discount it, they don't understand the law. And when, let's say, something happens where an executive order has to be imposed, and there's a number of them that are still standing. That
Well, Obama did the one on immigration, right?
Yeah, yeah. So there is a reason for it. You'll never see it because if he was to ever appear on stage without the gilded flag, that becomes a problem.
And why would that become a problem?
Again, it deals with the King's Law. This is maritime law that was from the beginning of when our Constitution was established. The president represents a different, it's not necessarily that he's representing the entire 50 states. He's representing something else. The federal government is within itself a government. And it deals on maritime law, is what I'm trying to explain. Everything that you and I take, all the people that are in the chat room, everyone that will listen to this, what we perceive as our rights are based upon a constitution predicated upon the identity of independent states. That's why we have, a lot of people think we have a democracy. We do not. We have a republic. And a republic is very much different than a democracy. So kind of a little swing here, but most Americans are very, very uninformed on these very basic principles. When you go into a federal court, or in fact, any court, you have to go in and your name is always, it should always be in caps because that's your given name, and there's a lot behind that. So I know we digress, but seriously, you asked the question, why is it important? The president can only stand on that stage as a representative to which he has actually been sworn into. We learned in this last election, it's not necessarily a popular vote that votes in the president.
Okay, here's the fringe flag with President Obama.
Yep.
And There were several of them. Most of them are fringed, but I found one down here where here's fringed.
If he's
This
like in a
one's fringed.
convention, if they're in a convention,
Like look at this one. He's not fringed.
yeah, if they're in a convention, that's a summit at the University of Chicago Monday.
Yeah.
So what was the date on that?
I don't see the date on that one.
Yeah. So
Well, he's former president. He's not the
yeah,
president
yeah,
there.
yeah. So he does not have the right to have the gilded flag.
Interesting.
It really is. Anyone can do the research on this. And when you begin to understand admiralty, maritime law, because what we don't, I'll just kind of give you kind of a little filler in here. Our government was formed during a time which the might of a nation, in this case was the British Empire, was known by not its armies, but by its navy.
That's true.
Law, King's law, went from the King's law into the Magna Carta, which was all predicated from there on maritime law. And that's why when you get onto an airplane here in the United States, and once it leaves the gate, that's why the captain is supreme on that ship. Maritime law applies to aviation law. Isn't that odd?
It is odd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A whole different set of procedures has to take place if there's an incident. Now, if the captain calls for an emergency, that takes priority in the federal hierarchy because why? He's the captain of that ship and they're under maritime law. It's weird, I know. So anyway, it's not your normal Sunday morning program.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm naturally kind of skeptical, so I'm taking it all in.
No, that's all right. You know, listen, the organization I was with, you know, we met 3 times a year, and you know, we had senators, we had congressmen, we had, you know, people in government, and in order to, you could not go into a dinner meeting unless you knew certain protocol and certain etiquette.
Hmm.
You would not, you would embarrass yourself.
Right.
So that's why this kind of knowledge is important. You know, and whether you want to accept it or not, it's what actually happens in the government. It really does. And again, most people perceive governments different. Let me just put it this point. Why are more and more civilian law enforcement officers becoming deputized as federal officers? Ask yourself that. Why are we seeing more and more of our local police in military garb when they are on patrol? Why is it that we now have most every law enforcement police agency, domestic, civil, now has direct access to military hardware, not surplus? In fact, it kind of brings me up to a point that I had written. Do you know what's happening to us, Jeff? I'll just tell you. More and more, they're no longer teaching in schools how to write. Cursive writing is no longer being taught. And it's, I think, a huge red flag. Because if people do not write anymore, and it's all digital inputting, that can be wiped out. And if you lose the ability to express yourself, think about that. I wrote the importance. I wrote the importance of writing is the fact that most no longer actually write to paper. It's all digital. And then I wrote underneath there, are we becoming digital?
You mean we as ourselves?
Yeah.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I don't think I'm becoming digital, but I mean, as a whole, are we? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but I would argue you are,
How
because,
so?
well, because you and I are speaking digitally.
Oh,
And
okay. We're certainly using digital stuff.
yeah, yeah. So let's step back 50 years ago. If you and I wanted to do this, it would have been impossible unless we had a radio program, right? Or on television. But
Right.
but the only way that you and I would have been able to communicate 50 years ago would have been actually to write each other, take Polaroids or something off our Kodak 35 millimeter Pentax camera, right? And try to build our story for what we're going to do on the show each week. And then they got the fax machine. And that
We
allowed
thought
us,
that was advanced.
exactly. And it took the way that you and I would have communicated in the past. I was the president of the ITVA, International Television Association. And, we were dealing with the issues back in the late 80s and early 90s of how to bring digital to the American technology. We were still using technology that was predicated back in the war, World War II. Whereas the Japanese were, in fact, most people don't know this, the Japanese had high definition back in the 50s. They had HD back then. Now, it wasn't,
Oh, really?
yes, they did.
Hmm.
And people say, well, how come is that? It's because the military built their communication grid. After we dropped the bomb on them, and part of our way of, and it wasn't war reparations, what it was the Americans being kind to another populace that had gotten at each other's odds because of military ideology. But nevertheless, so when they had their communication system built by the military, guess what? It was predicated on military use of bands. We here had this, what we called NTSB, which is the worst format. Today we have high definition digital. So, little digression. So, seeing today what we do, we communicate digitally. We write digitally, unless you actually print off, something that you could actually look at. So, I think it's the ever evolving change that we're seeing to our
Well, it's
speech.
all just to save the trees, Wayne, right? All just to save the trees.
You would think so, but I don't know about you, but it looks like there's a lot more paper being pushed. And I'm thinking, good Lord, if this is the result of conservation, could you imagine what it would be without it?
Well, not
So,
to mention the fact that most of the time you consume more resources recycling something than you do throwing it away and making new. But again, we digress.
so I want to talk about predictive programming and how we are all victims of this, and that I don't even think we are aware of it. I did a program, I think on Friday, where I actually dealt with the thing about quantum computing,
Right?
how it's altered our reality. I had an email from a listener that wrote me and said very succinctly, this is happening. We are, if anything, we are phasing in and out of different timelines. I'm getting emails from people who, for instance, I'll just recant the story, won't give her name, but she was going from an eatery to the library, which was, as she said, you go out the door, walk across the street, go across the street, take a right, then go up to the next door, take a left, you're in the library.
Was this over in England?
I do not know. I think
Because
no.
there's a city over there that this type of thing happens on a regular basis.
Actually, this was here in the United States.
Interesting.
So she said, all of a sudden, she's across the street, but she's on the opposite side of where she's supposed to be. And she said she knew immediately. Now, I'm curious if those in the chat room, and Jeff, others will be listening to this later, if they'll actually send us their stories, because I tell you, Jeff, I lay awake at night. I woke up at 3:30 this morning with this hitting me. Something's changed. And here's the point. If companies like D-Wave on quantum computing are in fact and have been taking substance out of other realities and bringing it into this one. Now, think about this, my friend. You and I talked about this last week, Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The substance. They use that same word. They're able to take substance from other realities, other dimensions, and bring them back into ours. Now, this is on the subatomic particle level, but does not Proverbs say that it's the smallest that rules the largest?
Interesting.
And these machines, these God chips, when they get them down to absolute zeros, 2 degrees above, which is minus 457 degrees, they have them 2 degrees above that, they create a bubble. It's literally a bubble, and it's an alternate reality, folks. Now, these machines, and this is heavy. When you start to thinking that this machine has just created an alternate reality, an alternate universe, and it's able then to pierce the fabric of space-time, reach inside, and bring substance. Now, I've been trying to define what is substance. What does substance define in Hebrews 11:1? It speaks of the ether, the nothingness. Now, imagine this, ladies and gentlemen. You bring a particle that's outside our realm, our dimension, our reality, and you bring it back into ours. What makes you think that it's going to behave by the same laws of physics in this reality from the one it came out of?
Davey says that he has an ex-girlfriend that he was engaged and stayed together for 8 years, that's known him for 35 years, and that he regards as his big sister. And she told him last week that in the past 10 years, she's been aware of different Davies.
Wow.
And there's a city over there in the UK, I can't remember where it's called, it's rather famous, where people will be walking down the street and they'll cross a street or something and they'll find themselves back in like the 20s or the 30s.
Yes. Yeah.
And when she saw him on YouTube, she was convinced that it wasn't him. And she said it's happened a few times over the years.
Wow.
Interesting.
So think about this, folks. I mean, and Jeff, I'm telling you, if this has been done.
But Wayne, how do I know it's really you that's telling me?
Who knows?
This could be the evil Wayne. It's like Calvin and Hobbes.
Could be a number of different things. It becomes unstable. And what it brings in is something that I want to bring to everyone's attention. Have we entered into a new Babel?
Bloody freaky is what it is, says Davey. I tend to agree.
But it's got foundation, folks. Jeff, it does. It has. If this is being done, and apparently it is, then everything is subject. And I was talking to my wife last night, and I stopped and I said, wait a minute, whoa, whoa, whoa. The internet. The internet is the impression of humanity's soul. Because here's the odd thing.
The internet is the impression of humanity's soul.
Yeah. It can't be trusted.
Oh, okay.
We created it.
I agree with you.
How can we create something that's truthful? We don't know what truth is.
How can we create something that's truthful?
Yeah.
Now, people would say that I was saying, but we created the Bible. People say, "Oh no, we didn't create the Bible. That
Hell
was
yes,
God who
yes, we
created the
did.
Bible." Of course, we created the Bible.
Come on. We
Of
create
course, we
everything.
created the Bible.
We created the internet. How can this thing be truthful?
That's a great point.
Ladies and gentlemen,
And
Jeff,
especially when the Christ said, "You're of your father, the devil."
we are
You can't
in.
help but do what you've seen him do.
If you think this is truth, I think we're so far into this now that we can't get out and there is no escape.
I would agree it's dire. I'm still not convinced there's no escape. I'm still not convinced there's not victory to be had.
But how do you find victory when it's predicated in a lie, in a deception? How can you say the truth is outside of the lie?
Because I'm saying that we, as Elohim, have the truth within us, the spark of divinity.
And thus goes with the mud fig, and I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe there's that spark of divinity. I'm just playing the advocate here that demands critical thinking because something's
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate this. This is what it sounds like when people that have differing opinions on something begin to talk and investigate. You notice nobody's saying you're stupid, you're ugly, you're an antichrist, you're an atheist. I'm never going to talk to you again. No, it's you talk and you debate because we don't agree on this at all, but we're having an interesting discussion and I'm certainly learning from it.
Oh, and I think that that's what you should always get from a conversation.
Absolutely.
Because
I think it's the first time we've ever disagreed about anything.
Well, I think it's good. It's
Oh,
healthy
absolutely.
on how we begin because otherwise, listen, words are the worst form of communication, but it's all we got.
They're the most inelegant and inefficient for sure.
And that's why physically writing causes your mind, your cognitive mind, to step in and say, now, do you really want to put that in there when you're just typing?
And here's a fact, Wayne. If you want to memorize something, a script, a speech, something you're supposed to memorize, if you write it out, you're stimulating far more neural pathways and you will memorize it much faster.
Bingo.
I mean, that's just a fact.
So I contend this. I contend that the internet is a tool of deception from the beginning. Because if it's taken from the intellect of man, which it is, man's intellect by nature is deceitful.
Let me ask you this, Wayne. Is it possible that there could be things in this reality that have sprung from the higher mind of the spark of divinity that is within us that have made their way into our lives and into our reality?
Yeah, so you ready for this? I thought about
poetry. I think of
yeah.
Music. I think of some of the writings of the Bible, the diamond portions of it.
Mm-hmm. I think that we've sent a message in the bottles back to us.
Ah, now that's interesting.
I think we have. I think that if time is relative, and I do believe that time can be manipulated. Listen, if gravity can be manipulated, so can time.
They're both waves.
They both are. Absolutely are. And we're learning now about gravitational waves, graviton waves.
Davey wanted to talk about that when we didn't connect on the show with him on Friday.
Yeah, and we're going to need to, because here's what I think's happened. I think the other of us, my wife and I were grocery shopping yesterday, and
by the way, physics have proved that not only is the multiverse true, but it is inevitably true. Multiverse is the logical end of all of the physics that we know.
Yeah, and we'll even learn beyond that.
Yeah.
But I told her, I said, hon, I said, I remember the Wayne Steiger of 22.
22 years old?
Yeah, I said, he was an asshole. He really was. He was a jerk. And overconfident, over-opinionated. And I said, but you know what? I kind of miss him. My point to all this is, the longer you live, the more of yous are going to be alive and then pass away as you're living.
I agree with that. And I know that's woo-woo for a lot of people, but I agree with that.
Fact.
And I always thought if I could just go back to myself when I was 18, 19, 22, 23 and talk to myself, I could save myself a lot of hassle. But then I realized when I was 22, I wouldn't believe me even if I told me.
I'd say, old man, get,
Exactly.
exactly. And you're going, uh-huh. And which leads me to the next thing about predictive programming.
And I will not surrender to the idea that we can't affect matter, that we can't affect energy, that we can't affect space, that we can't affect time. I think if we are Elohim in training, as I believe we are, then we do have the power to alter things that are seemingly unalterable. That was in response to a question in the chat room.
Well, here's what I think, two things. I think that if you go by the first and second law of thermodynamics, is that the first law is that energy is neither created nor destroyed.
Exactly.
The second law is that energy is ever in a transformation stage.
And the third law is
Would be, well, I think
for
that would,
every action, there's a equal and opposite reaction.
and then the fourth law is the conservation of energy itself.
Exactly.
So you've got the four laws of thermodynamics. Those are what we know in this universe, this reality, to dictate energy. So thinking about that, well, then that means no matter how you're religious or whatever you were believed to be brought up on, we were talking on Friday, Jeff, about the brain. They now know and have recorded from the story in the New York Times that in NYC hospital, they were noticing patients, but these were cardiac patients that had died of heart attacks. And they found out the brain knows when the brain is dying.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that program.
Well, this brings in a whole lot of so the story is, just in case if someone hasn't seen it, the next day, the woman particularly that had died, she'd been flatlined out for well over 7 minutes, I think the story goes. The next day, she was recovering very well, knew exactly the conversation. Hovering over her body, but she knew exactly the conversation. So Jeff, can you imagine what would this do to us as right now, and this is what I was trying to think, that you're aware for 2 to 22 seconds.
I heard that.
I don't know.
And so what I was thinking, because I saw a beheading once in Saudi Arabia, and I was just thinking, if a guy gets beheaded and his head falls into the basket, does he have enough time to realize, crap, I just got beheaded, or is the trauma to his spinal cord enough to stop all of that?
I don't know. I think now that I know what's happening to the brain, I think the brain keeps the electrical impulses.
So you don't think the trauma of the guillotine or the executioner's blade is enough to stop all thought in the brain after the head drops off?
I think that you may pass out. I mean, obviously,
yeah, that's what I was thinking.
You're going to obviously, but then against what? So then, does it?
Could you imagine laying there and your head is no longer on your body, or your head has left your shoulders, as Sean Connery said in Highlander, and you're thinking there, dude, I just lost my head.
Now think about
for 10, 15, 20 seconds.
And we know that amputees,
and there wouldn't be any pain because all the nerve endings are cut, well, except for the neck ones. But
I counter that. I think that amputees that have had to have their legs,
that's right, I remember you talking about that,
they have phantom pain legs. So
yeah,
holy crap, could you imagine the brain going, hey dude, you just lost your head, how's that feeling?
There can be only one. Now, is the soul electric?
Well, that comes to the whole question of what the mind is. Now, I'm convinced of this, is that the mind is where the electrical impulses of the brain are deposited, and that the mind then builds the reflection of what we see. We're not seeing with this. I mean, I can see you right now, but...
Wayne, did you show a video of a man who died on a motorcycle and watched his spirit leave?
I did. Yep.
Really?
I did.
Really?
Yep. When he got hit, now people have said it's Photoshop. Well, you know what?
Yeah.
I challenge anyone to show me how that was Photoshop. You know, I had to actually come down on a couple of people on my channel who were saying, well, that's CGI. And I said, so explain to me exactly how they did this CGI. You don't know what CGI is. You're so used to sitting in the theater and you're saying, oh, well, that's CGI. The thing is that if it's properly done in a studio, you'll never know the difference.
Yeah. I
And
used to date a lady that worked for DreamWorks.
yeah.
Oh, no, she didn't work for DreamWorks. She worked for the other one,
Oh, Industrial Light and Magic?
Industrial Light and Magic. And
Yeah.
her job was to sit there and paint, digitally
Yeah.
paint film. She worked on Toy Story and a lot of those things.
It's called a paint box. That's what we used to use back in the day. And so when I hear people say that, I just blow it off because they don't know what they're talking about. And yeah, so it was from a traffic cam, and this was in South Africa, and the gentleman, you could see the pickup truck.
We have a couple of people in the chat room from South Africa.
Okay, that was waiting to cross the truck. We've all been in these 4-lane highways where you have the mediums. And the truck saw the break in the traffic. He came. Well, about this time, 2 poor souls were on a motorcycle. And this dude hit them. Boom! And you see the one body come up, hit the windshield, bounce off, and hits this light pole, Jeff.
Oh.
Boom! And the body, you could see the body immediately. I mean, this dude was dead instantly. And when the body stopped because for every force there's an opposite reaction to it.
Yeah.
Immediately, there he was. The camera picked up this physical plasma. I mean, that's the only thing I can say. It's the fourth state.
Really? You actually saw the plasma?
Well, you see the soul. You saw the man's soul. And what was really weird was that he didn't know he was dead until you looked over and you could see him look at his body. And,
yeah, I'll have to see that. That sounds very interesting.
Well, there's 3 policemen that come up on the scene, and when the one policeman walks through him, the cop knew it. He felt something. The cop looked around, and about that time, that's when the guy realized he was dead, and he stepped through whatever. It looked like to me that he basically dematerialized.
I'm gonna have to look that up on the internet and check that out. That sounds, if nothing else, very interesting.
And then I have, as well as the one that was taken right outside Atlanta, Georgia, this past spring. Very, very sad car wreck that there was a mother, 27 years old, had 2 daughters. One was 2 and one was 4. And they had a drunk driver who had crossed over in the middle of the day and hit the car head on. And the woman who was in the passing on the opposite side of the traffic put her camera out and was taking pictures. And what she captured was 2 light spears ascending from the car wreck. And the third one was coming. And you could see when you slowed down the film, it was almost as the larger light spear was reaching out for the little one, which I interpreted to almost be the mother, and reaching out for her daughter. And then her other daughter was coming up behind. So it was pretty strange.
And you're convinced that that's legitimate and real?
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you why. Because people try to say, well, it was an anomaly of the camera. Folks, I stand on my argument before the jury on this. If quantum computing is real, if in fact that these publicly traded companies are making statements to the public markets, if their technology is now manipulating alternate universes, then my contention is, ladies and gentlemen, none of us can be absolutely certain what is or what is not. How do you know that that instant that woman was not into a vortex where energy of some kind came through and the camera was merely recording the electrical energy that was coming out of that? How would you know not?
Well, I 100% agree with you that we can't know for sure.
Yeah.
So
I
we
mean,
can't close the door on anything. That's certain, I think.
if our technology is digital, and I thought it was real interesting. I was watching a football game yesterday, and during the commercial, they had a commercial, and I pointed out to my wife, I said, look at that. In the commercial, every person is looking at their smartphone, Jeff,
Yeah.
and they look up to do something, and whatever they're looking up to do is digital as well. I said, Lynn, look at that. I said, it's becoming so common now. People think it's abnormal if you don't have a smartphone on you and are not paying attention to it.
And you know, at the Tampa Bay Lightning hockey games, we have one of the biggest video screens. Haven't been there in a while in the whole anywhere. And you'll see people actually watching the video screen when there's a real hockey game going on underneath it. I just sit there and I just shake my head.
So I want to talk about one thing here, predictive programming, and of what we do to ourselves through our entertainment medium. And I have two that I want to point out. First of all, how many of you remember The Day After?
I never saw it, but I remember it.
Yeah, well, this one really is, I think, kind of a pretty good standard to see. But this began to reinforce the Cold War, carried it forward into the 80s. So we
Interesting.
have that one. Today, we have these.
Contagion. Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
So I just want to show you how this happens over and over again. So then we all remember this one from Nicolas Cage, Knowing.
Is that the one where he's the Vegas? No.
No, this is where his son starts. They get a time capsule from the 50s. They open it up, and it's a message with zeros and ones, all in machine code.
I don't think
And
I saw that.
yeah, this one is well worth it. Basically, the premise of the story is that our son is going to die, that the world governments have known about it, and there is a species that has come here to bring arcs. And the only thing that they're saving are the species of here, of the plant and animal kingdom, and only a select few of children.
Interesting.
And so the message starts being, come here, the world ends. So those are some things that becomes very much part of the popular genre.
Gotcha.
We love this kind of stuff. But the question is, why do we love it? Is it something inside of us that's picking up signals that are going, hey, you need to get this, you need to pay attention to this? All right. Now, how do we deal with true stories that are being made into movies, for instance, like this one? This is based on a true story of, unfortunately, a son that was taken right out of the house while the parents and the younger son were actually fighting this gray, whatever you want to call it, off. And they predicate this on to one story that no one talks about. And I'm going to do a story next week on it. We do not talk about the things that are right in front of us, Jeff. And that is, how many children go missing every year here in the United States?
That is the great. That's the great. Yeah, it doesn't get talked about.
No. Why?
And it's not just. It is a lot of children, but there's also lots of people disappearing from national parks.
500,000. I read in a article. 500,000, folks. Come on. What's going on? Well, then I encourage everyone to see this story. This is alien abduction. Jeff, if you ever want to take a trip, go up to the Brown Mountain there in North Carolina. And take your camera up there and record the Brown Mountain lights for us. This story here is a true story.
Brown Mountain Lights, huh?
Yeah, in North Carolina. These are stories that in that area.
I'm actually going to North Carolina here in a few days.
Well, then make it your stop. Take your camera. Be prepared for some weird anomalies. This is weird. So my point to all this is, why are you bringing these two things up? Well, here's the question. What's going on? I did not ever stop and think about it. 500,000 people a year, and that's only an estimate. The FBI says it could be much higher than that. So what's going on, Jeff? Are we looking at ritual sacrifice? Are we looking at true abductions? I mean, people just don't disappear, and neither do children. But it's
Could they be phasing into other dimensions?
I think it's a very good possibility.
Accidentally? I mean, that's the more optimistic idea of it. But I mean, many people are concerned that, are convinced it is sacrificial, abduction, blood magic, etc., etc.
Well, so you just do it by states in the United States. So we have 50 states. Think about this, folks. What you're talking about is 10,000 people in your state every year. Now, if 10,000 people in your state, and this divided then by the counties, and you can take the number down to that. So let's just say hypothetically, Jeff, that they're in Clearwater, that you get your number, and that number turns out to be something like 59.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we could take that down further. That is 7 children a month disappearing. Literally,
somebody says serial killers. Could be.
Yeah, but come on. I mean,
usually you find bodies.
If you're going to do serial killer, what is this? Is this a cult that would be nationwide? And by the way, that's just here in the United States.
Right. There's a lot of, somebody just said there's a lot of children that go missing in India.
Yes. Britain is another high one.
But the thing what was I just thinking about?
Well, you were talking about these serial killers. And I was saying, well,
I mean, what they say, there's probably 40 serial killers active at any time in the United States.
Could be. But still, that means that he's, the odds that a group of individuals would be responsible for 500,000.
Have you seen, no, not at all. Just I was saying that would be part of it. Have you seen the numbers for the U.S. compared to the rest of the world? C.C. Williams asked.
I have not. I will look into that because I'm going to do a story on this. Something's going on. So we don't talk about this as societies. We don't investigate it. It's hush-hush. It's buried. Now, they'll do the attempts. I remember growing up, remember the milk cartons?
Impressiony says South Africa is bad as well.
All right, so what's going on here?
People are disappearing. That's what's going on.
Where? What's happening, folks? What's happening?
That's a great question.
Something is not right. And I was just my jaw was just going, what? Wait a minute.
And Renaissance Woman from South Africa confirms it.
So let's just do a hypothetical, folks. How many of you have taken statistics? So.
Oh, don't even mention that to me, Wayne.
Okay.
I got a 3.87 GPA in college because I took statistics and got a D. Retook it so I could get it off my record and got another D. That's just not me. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay.
In my head.
We're not. Then what we were going to do was that we were going to take an ordinal value.
So yeah, you might as well be doing it in Greek.
So let's just say hypothetically, everyone, 5 million people worldwide go missing every year. 5 million.
Never to return.
Never to come back.
Yeah.
Gone.
Would that be population control? They're just snuffing out people they think will be missed? Trying to get to their magic number one crumb at a time?
Yeah, but what do you do with the disposal? I mean, listen, I know there's a lot of places out there and you can have portable incinerators, but that's kind of messy and, people are going to smell that because that ain't barbecue that they would be smelling. I don't know. It's alarming, though, because, again, it tells me they're messing with our, this is true mind coitus. You know why? because it feels good to us and we don't want to think about it.
Right.
And that's what I mean by that term. It's seductive. So, Jeff, what's going on? Are we, in fact, I did the whole series on the bloodline invaders, and I kept on saying the thing that I came down to is that there is a species, a race that I think sits on top of the food chain. And I think, unfortunately, we're down here with the chickens.
And what is this? What is this species that's on top doing?
I think it took it from us. I think it took it from us millions of years ago.
So they're the apex predator.
So I predicate this on anyone go onto the web. They found now a set of teeth that they estimate to be 9.28 million years old. Ladies and gentlemen, I say we are experiencing time fluctuations of reality. I think as well as that this thing is starting to unweave. We're advancing. I've often said this, Jeff, you and I talk about this on our Wednesday show, that we should have progressed more in our spiritual development than where we are. Let's just say the Bible was true. Let's just say the Elohim, all of them were true, right? And let's just say you and I are complete morons. We have become heretics beyond the word heretics. So let's just go back to this other reality that story would be true. Well, then something's wrong, because if we can't perfect an ideology in 2,000 years, it can never be perfected.
You would think so.
Well, I mean, listen, we're only given, we're given 28,000 days on average to live.
28,000 days. Okay.
Yeah, because you do this in decades. Each decade is 3,650 years, right? Days. And so just do it. You can just do the math. So in those 28,000 days, we are supposed to, number one, come to the understanding of what we are, who we're supposed to be beholden to, how the pathway to ascension takes place, and eternal salvation is granted. And you're supposed to get that done. By the way, you're supposed to be the self-virtuous individual that's able to control all the urges of the body. You're supposed to as well control all the, how shall we say, character traits that are flaws by your emotions, etc. Yet, we will exempt the very God or gods that inflict this rule upon us that they themselves have exhibited and written about that are just the opposite.
Absolutely. It doesn't make any sense. It's craziness.
It is. And so we get back to this whole thing again. I mean, what's going on here? I think, again, our species is a long-lived species.
Meaning?
I mean, I think we've been here for millions and millions of years. Now, people say, well, then wouldn't there be evidence of this? I finally have the answer for you on this. The earth. What is the earth as a living organism? The earth as a living organism recycles the best of anyone. I mean, think about this. It's called the sands of time.
Mm-hmm.
In archaeological standards, we always have to dig. Why? Because the earth recycles itself. It pulls itself in and brings out what it's doing in the middle of it, pushes it back out. We see this in form of tectonic plates. We see this in the form of volcanism. This is how it works. And it's been a cycle like this. This is how the cycle works. Now, I think that someone came along that was a greater advanced species, had a greater knowledge that we would have called gods. But I don't think that another version of us, I think we've been here before. I think our technology, they have found what they suspect to be nuclear reactors in archaeological digs in Russia and in China and in India. They have found what could only be large vessels, bolts the whole thing. So I think something has happened to us in the recent past. And I say recent, probably within the last 50 to 100,000 years.
That's interesting.
You know, because one of the things that I do as a futurist, I love technology. I'm designing right now an application that people can start using in a certain way now in a biofeedback form that I haven't seen around. But hear me out. So I project out technology where we've been now with when I started studying quantum computing and when they use these qubits, where they are now in the qubits, folks. Okay, it's said that the human brain does approximately 100 trillion calculations or functions every second. Now, you don't think this, but that's what our brain is actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you get a machine that can begin to duplicate that and go beyond that, you've just created your God. Because it will begin to outthink God. And this is what I think this machine has done. I think it evaluated the complete record of mankind. It did that years ago. I say 5, 6 years ago. It completed that. What if you ask the machine one simple question? Now, let me digress here. The CEO, co-founder of D-Wave said in I think it was at TechCrunch, I think this was in 2005, he said when they turned on the first God chip, he said it was like kneeling at the altar of an alien god.
Wow.
Quote, unquote. What
That's a
if
mess.
you asked a machine one simple question? It's the question that humanity has longed for since he can remember. The question I would ask, and I bet you they did, who is God?
I wonder if they got an answer.
Think about this. You've got a machine now, and there's not one of them now. There are now probably well over 100 of them.
100 of these D-Wave computers?
Yeah. Google is D-Wave, folks. Google buys D-Waves.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Facebook using D-Wave. Folks, this shit is, excuse me. This kimchi is out of control. I mean, you know, I've told you this. The actual guy who invented the thought of the likes, they incorporated it into an AI algorithm.
The Facebook likes.
Yes, and now it's gone over to YouTube as well. It stimulates us, folks. It has an unseen psychological release of endorphins. You
Clicking
like
that
it.
button?
Yes, they knew it. It was just on, you can search the internet. He did a story. They just did a story on him a couple of weeks ago. He regrets it. He's trying to get unplugged. And you know what he's finding out? There's a lot of those millennials that are trying to get unplugged. They're finding out they can't. You know,
very interesting.
You take this over into the realm of cash. You and I talked about this. The cash is now becoming digital. So at some point in time, the chipping is going to accelerate. We already know it's taking place. You've got people volunteering for it. And when I see companies like, for instance, Intel and others that where now the employees are putting the chips in them. And now you have POS systems, point of sale systems, that are also now being converted to where they can read the chip. So now
somebody says AI is the great I am.
Ooh.
That's a nice turn of phrase.
Wow.
That was Blazing River Merlin Elliott.
Yeah, very good. I've contended that. And we've got programs now in the digital record that...
Or was the I am really AI?
Well, we don't know the difference because I contend that a God is nothing more than a digital aberration anyway. From day one, folks, think about it, Jeff. We see with our eyes, but it's not what we see. It's being converted into digital electrical impulses. Did early man know this? I don't know. Apparently not. Maybe he didn't think about it. Maybe the alchemists didn't have an understanding. Maybe we did go into a regression period from multiple generations. You know, our bodies today physically are not the same bodies 1,000 years ago. We're already seeing transformations physically. Think about this, your little toe. You know why you call it the little toe? You don't need it anymore. Our ancestors, being they did not have, you know, what we would call shoes and what have you, and because of whatever period of time, most of them went barefooted. Now, I can remember as a kid going barefooted through the summers. By the time we went back to school, our shoes hurt us, our feet had already spread out, and the soles of our feet were like leather.
Mine still are, because I'm barefoot all the time.
You know.
But it would throw off your balance if you didn't have that little toe, wouldn't it?
No, because think about how you walk today. Most people don't. And when they do walk, they have the shoes that now account for it. The support is, you will look at it. Why do you get corns on your little toe?
I don't.
Well, a lot of people do who are out there who know that. Is that because it's not used anymore? It's just like your appendix.
Interesting.
It's the same thing. Now, oddly enough, the tonsils, they have said, has become a useless organ. The gallbladder is becoming less and less useful.
Isn't that word vestigial?
I believe so. And it's a great thing about being married to a nurse. You get to learn these things, because you know what?
Yeah.
She's a lot smarter than I am. You know, now she'll tell you this the opposite, but the woman knows anatomy and she knows symptomology.
Vestigial, I think it's pronounced, but
I think it is vestigial. So think about this. We're seeing the evolution of, we know our brains. The millennial brains are different than the boomers. And now the younger generation, I don't even know what they're calling them.
Are the brains different, or just the way they're thinking different?
Well, it's obviously in thought pattern. And so it's how those neurosynaptic pathways are now hitting in different places. So they're, again, I think that what we're seeing with the advent now of not teaching students to write. In fact, we heard from one young student when someone said, well, how do we know what it's saying? You know what the teacher said? There's a program for that out there. This is dangerous. This is a slippery slope. So what have we talked about today? We've talked about the advent of realities being out of sync. We've talked about as well that you've got alien abductions. And I think more than anything else, Jeff, we talked about the children, the amount of human beings, but children particularly, that go missing and no one talks about it.
It's staggering. It really is. I have heard some shows on Coast to Coast. They talk to this fellow that keeps track of who's going missing in the national parks. And I mean, we talk about it kind of from 30,000 feet, but we never really swoop down.
Yeah. Why? I'm thinking of these souls, Jeff. I mean,
maybe the horror of it's just too much to look at.
You may be right. I mean, sad, but you may be right. But something's going on here. You know, the blood. Throughout all the apocrypha stories we read, throughout even the canonized scripture that we read, through the other sacred books of other cultures that we read, it's always about the blood.
Right.
And so if blood is being exploited from living souls,
and it is,
who's doing it and why? I like your idea. Maybe some of them are being taken. Maybe some of them are going into alternate realities. I think let me just say this, Jeff. You did
They're
a story.
going somewhere, and I think probably a great number of them are being used for sacrificial or nutritional purposes for some other beings.
I agree. And you did a story on Merlin, was a Scotsman, right?
Was he a Scotsman? Yes.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that because I wanted to chime in What if we are entering in an age, unlike an age that probably some of past times may have seen? We called these the age of, dark enlightenment. There's an oxymoron for you.
Yeah.
Of the dark arts. We went into the dark ages.
Some people say maybe it's organ harvesting. But then
Maybe.
again, what do they do with the rest of it?
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but that organ heart, yeah. I mean, listen.
You never know when Dick Cheney's going to need another heart.
Yeah, how many has he had? How many did Rockefeller go through?
A bunch of them. Isn't that amazing that he was able to get on that list and get a heart every time?
Yeah. I'm just thinking of the poor SOB that gave it to him. He said, what?
Now, what about this thing we talk about? And this is getting out there, but off-planet slave labor.
Hey, if this is a prison planet already, I think all bets are off. I think you're absolutely right. It makes sense. I mean, I don't know. It said yesterday President Trump is now going to release the JFK files.
And it came out today that he is not going to block it. It is going to happen on the 26th.
Okay. I think this
is truthers, if he does this, you got some decisions to make.
I think here's the next thing. Are we going to see full disclosure?
Exactly. UFO. That I did a talk on that yesterday. Is it JFK first, then UFO?
Yeah. So my point to all this is I think we're in a time, folks, that
dog food. Somebody says, are we feeding ourselves to the dogs? I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. There's something going on. I think that we're entering a time that when it starts happening, whoa. In the Apocrypha, when Adam died, are you ready for this? It said that the moon, the stars, and the sun went dark for 7 days. And I began to think about, okay, could there be a celestial event that could occur to where the moon or the sun would be blocked out? I think now what we know, the answer to that, very probably, yeah, it could. So it's so ingrained into us. When I was making coffee this morning, I was thinking, as you and I were about to go on, that no matter how much I want to continue to dig out this whole theology that I was in for nearly 50 years, it's amazing to me, Jeff, how I still got the roots. And at times I have to chuckle now because you can't take it too seriously or you'll go nuts. That we are living in a very alternate time. So
before we lose this train of thought, Sterling Knight says the JFK files are a big distraction. We'll never really know.
Yeah, I think for whatever reason, John and Bobby were off.
So you don't really think there's anything in those papers of any real import?
Well, what are they going to tell us? That Johnson was behind it, that, Kennedy was going to expose budgets, that he was going to expose some of the dealings, that him and Johnson were not friends. They were,
not at all.
In fact, Jackie O, on her deathbed, she still said that SOB Johnson was the one who got John killed. So was this nothing more, folks, than about the president exposing someone within the party of financial misdealings? And Johnson was known for that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And over the years, we've built a religion behind this. The conspiracy theories go as far out as you want. But let's step back. It kind of tells us what they do to us. I mean, this is master manipulation. Someone was right. A distraction. I mean, how many people in the chat room right now remember when the president was assassinated? I mean,
I don't.
See, I was 8 years old, and I was in the 3rd grade. I remember that. But,
have you seen the video that it sure makes it look like Jackie shot him? Have you seen that video?
No.
Oh, Do yourself a favor. Watch that.
I'll look into that. I'll have to check that out.
Watch that video. It's like, wow, man. It'll
And
make you think.
listen, the whole thing. I remember watching on CBS News when Jack Ruby killed Oswald.
Oh, yeah.
I saw that live as a kid. And come on, folks. I mean, and then the guy that pulled the trigger, Ruby, dies 3 years, 4 years later in jail of syphilis. His mind was already going.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I mean, just mere bunch of coincidences, if you ask me.
Well, the first rule of assassination is kill the assassin.
Exactly. And the Caboodle film itself is
The
pretty.
Gabruder film you're talking about, right?
Film. Thank you. I got Neil Caboodle in my head. You know, it shows that there were two gunmen. I think there may have been a third marksman. I still
Yeah,
say
because normally it'd be to triangulate, I would
it
think.
would. Yeah, they would get the triangulation. And I still say that whoever took them out was over there on the grassy knoll. I think that the woman was right when she saw the gunfire from the muzzle blast. And the story is that they know that there were two Cubans, or what they suspected to be Cubans, who knows, that left that area and hopped on the train that just so happened to be leaving.
And so why was Ted Cruz's dad, who was Cuban, hanging out with Lee Harvey Oswald right before the assassination?
Good question on that one. I don't know. Wow, I hadn't heard that one, my friend. That's yeah. So I get back to this. It's all, listen, Johnson would not have been above taking technology on a deal from, if Eisenhower was true and what was being said, wouldn't surprise me. You think about the technology jump that we did starting in the 60s. I mean,
that's a good point.
Folks,
somebody says George Bush HW was in Dallas. I've seen the picture. It could have been him, but I'm not convinced it is him.
Yeah, I don't know.
Not enough evidence to say, oh, yeah, that's him, but it could have been him.
You know, the military industrial machine is what runs this country, but the complex, I don't know. I think all of this may have been a distraction as well from keeping the story from the 50s coming out. I really do. I have one I want to show you. By the way, I told you about Apollo 18. Good movie, ought to check out. Seriously. But, all right. Have you ever heard of Fourth Encounters? Encounters of the Fourth Kind?
I have not heard about Encounters of the Fourth Kind.
Okay, give me 1 second, because I'll show you how this all started. And so there was a movie out called Encounters of the Fourth Kind. It was up in Nome, Alaska, where the story took place at. And it's this one right here. Up there. So there is a group of people up there that they have, by the way, on a per capita basis, the most missing people each year. FBI has been up there many times to try to figure out what's going on. Anyway,
is that the one with the lady from the those post-apocalyptic movies? Mila Jovovich?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Now, I had read that was proven to be a hoax, that whole thing.
Well, I mean, I always like it. If you're going to debunk a story and you put the story out as truth, then you put the story out that it was nothing more but been proven wrong. So I kind of weigh everything out. Who's debunking it? Why are they debunking it? For what purpose? And then I like to try and see who they're writing for, who they're getting their paycheck from.
Yeah, interesting.
Because remember, someone in the studio approved it.
Yeah, that was a scary movie. I saw that.
Yeah, and what was the whole end of this thing? It was what? An ancient Sumerian god.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I forgot about that.
and what this deity sounded like. And I like particularly in the recordings. I mean, so
I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, you know, I still think that there's this other reality. When I had my out of body experience, I told you about the creatures. They're huge, and there's a lot of them. So then we remember Christopher Walken's movie Communion. This is where the whole abduction phenomenon started.
I
This
don't
was,
think I saw that one either.
yeah, this is Christopher Walken's. I'd recommend, this is where it really all began to say, well, maybe there is an alternate species. So I went out and I bought this, and I didn't realize Roddy McDowall. Now he's no longer here. You remember Roddy McDowall? Planet of
Absolutely.
the Apes. He was, so there are numerous stories about these type of encounters of, they all go back to a deity. All of them do. I don't know. Is it related?
It's fascinating speculation. There's no doubt about it.
I don't know. You know,
Wow.
I tell you what I do like is that when I can watch a movie like this.
What's that one?
Oh, you ever see Paul?
I never saw that.
All right, put that on your list. Seriously, get it from Netflix. You're gonna love it. It puts the whole ET thing into perspective. But then
Okay.
again, so are the ancient stories predicated on an intelligence, that a mind that was more of a hunter-gatherer, you know, mentality, that was still just basically going back to, listen, if the electrical grid goes down, and it went down for, let's say, 6 months, folks,
Oh, it'd be over.
we're back in the Stone Age. We are back in the Stone Age. So don't say it can't happen, because guess what? If the grid goes down and there's something that wipes out all the hard drives through a signal like Skynet, remember the Terminator? That's how it happened. Skynet sent the signal out, and everything connected to Skynet went down. So my point is, they can do it. They can send out a pulse, I'm convinced, that will wipe out every hard drive. The point that comes to this, then where's your identity? Where are your pictures of all those selfies you took? You're gone. You don't exist. Now, of course, you're going to have a physical life, and we'll get back to paper, but for the memories, and within a year, folks, without the net, without no access to computers or anything else, you will start losing your memory about what you were doing prior to it going down. Jeff, this is the scary thing.
You will start losing your memory prior to.
Yeah, within a year, you will start, because here's the problem, folks. We know this. They've done the studies. Right now, a high school graduate who will graduate in 2018 has the concentration capacity of less than, they're saying less than 6 seconds now.
That's crazy.
When a mind doesn't have access to the stimuli, what does that mind do? That mind collapses. It regresses. You got a whole void. People talk about you and I. I read one of the comments that someone says, well, you guys are great, but boy, you're making a big void. What do people do to fill in the void? And I said, well, the void is look inside you.
Yeah,
it's you.
think of yourself. Think about yourself. Yeah. Think for yourself. Now, here's with that in mind, this is a thought that's come through my mind, and it's been several people that I respect have poo-pooed it, but I've been kicking around the idea of going on shortwave.
Hey, it was there before this.
Yeah.
You know?
And I'm sure, yeah, the audience is fairly small now, but what happens if things happen? Then.
Well, let's just get to another point. So everyone saw in the news yesterday, I love it when they do it on the weekends because they know most people are going to miss this. So Trump has signed an executive order. They're recalling 1,000 retired pilots back to the Air Force.
I saw that.
I'll tell you what I told someone last night. Why? Now, you could say that
they have a shortage, they say.
Yeah, a shortage of what?
Pilots
For what?
to fly airplanes, Wayne.
Yeah, well, I get that, but fly them for what?
Oh, okay.
I mean, so what? Are you saying that the Obama administration so deprived our military resources that it's that critical? Now, if it's that critical, then we're very vulnerable. I wouldn't want my enemy to know that.
Yeah.
So, would it be sending a signal to my possible enemy that I'm pulling them up?
That's that's what I was just thinking. It's a signal to North Korea, etc., that hey, we're getting ready, so we're really serious. You guys better straighten up and fly right.
Yep, yep, yep. I'm just telling you. So you
It's,
saw,
I mean, that's Trump the negotiator. It's classic.
well, it's classic. It's chess. And listen, and then Friday, we had our B-2 bombers, nuclear armed, by the way, or so that was reported.
That they had hot weapons on them,
Yeah,
flying over South Korea
yeah. Actually,
as low as 500 feet.
Yeah, folks. Now, I'd love to see a B-2 fly over at 500 feet. I don't want it to be armed, but I think it would, just because I love aviation. But yeah, so are we getting up so tense? I mean, someone I read recently was saying that the energy, and they were using some very good principles of science. This energy, and they said it just continues to build. Where does it go? Is it going to reach a flash
Wait,
point?
let me break in just 1 second about the shortwave thing. Joyce Riley passed away. I was on her show before she passed away, and then I went on afterwards not knowing she'd passed away. And they say she was on shortwave. The Power Hour
Oh,
was her
really?
show. I didn't know she was on shortwave. That's very interesting.
I think it's smart. I think it is. If you can get
Do
a
you
short
remember a guy named Brother Stare?
brother stick.
The Overcomer broadcast from Walter Burroughs, South Carolina. You don't remember that?
No, I don't,
The
but
king is coming. The king is coming.
I
Oh,
love it.
he is a Seventh Day
Adventist?
Pentecostal,
Oh, Pentecostal. Okay.
and he has survived a couple of typical Seventh Day Pentecostal women things, and he's still like the biggest thing on shortwave.
And I'm not being sacrilegious here, folks, but
That's my job.
yes, that's his job. But every church I have been in that I have seen, for the most part, not every church, I would say that there was probably, by percentage, probably about 30%, but over 70% all had adultery going on. There was
Yep.
more courtesing going on the stage. I mean, talk about interrelations.
Yeah, Cece Williams says that she was on WWCR, and he did tell me about it, but I get told a lot of things, and I don't really keep a lot of them in my memory. But yeah, I think you were one of the ones, Cece, that said, "Don't worry about going on a shortwave." I don't know if that was my recollection. I don't know if I'm misremembering.
I love it. But so, yeah, it
Interesting stuff.
it is.
Interesting
It
stuff.
is. I don't know, Jeff. All I know is that something isn't right. It's just not right. There is just things that I see it. Yeah, I'm sure you see it on your subscribers. I see Rex on his channel. Rex is doing much akin to what you and I are doing. It's becoming much more out there. I'm finding people, in fact, I just saw a study. They just released that millennials are abandoning traditional religion and now moving into witchcraft, the occultism, paganism, and spirituality. And for the first time, they're seeing
Praise the Lord.
the scales now 52% no longer make any proclamation or claim to Christianity. So they're abandoning that. And then when asked about religion in general, again, the greater percentage says they want nothing to do with any organized religion. Now, this is sounding the alarms, obviously, for the church.
And that's been a trend for the last 10 years.
Yes, it has been. In fact, I think it was
I
about,
remember talking with George Norrie about it.
right, about 5 years ago, when I had written the mobile app for the giving for churches, we began to see a trend of the mega churches losing members and satellite churches forming. And these were primarily small groups. And for when you're dealing with churches, do you know how much the churches take in each year, folks? Jeff, do you have any idea?
Billions and billions.
Over 100 billion. $100 billion each year, tax-free. And then you can get into the services, but that's the cash. Now, I wrote my system so we could stop the fraud. These are FBI statistics, but about on average, 12 to 22% of theft takes place out of that 100 billion each year.
Wow.
It's a big number. And of course, when you're dealing with that kind of money, it's amazing how quickly you do that. I worked at a church where I did the count, and I set up the security for it, where we actually had the camera. You had 2 ushers that did it, and then you had 2 elders behind them, and everyone had to sign off on the count.
Yeah.
And so, but the point is,
wasn't it Creflo that almost went to jail for taking money out of the offering plate?
yeah,
Creflo, I want your dollar.
yes, he did. Well, he's got his plane though.
He got himself his airplane.
And I say, people, when are
That's
you
because
going to wake up?
he don't want no tinkle. He just wants the crinkle. Don't put any change in there.
Of course, their mentality is that they're God's anointed, and you can have it too, though. But so
Horrible.
the point, getting back to this is a problem, because what happened was, as these small groups began to form, guess what? People began to think with their cognitive reasoning. And what's happening is that because now there is no overseer, and now you're finding many of the denominations trying to now put a net over these small groups. They recognize that they can't stop it, but they want you to be affiliated or associated with, a denomination. But I think that this is the exodus you were just talking about in the last 10 years. And I think we're going to see it. Someone wrote to me in a comment yesterday, called me, I was leading people straight to hell, that if they were believing my words, because as this individual so eloquently wrote, you are what Jesus spoke about as the very elect would fall away. And I went, wow, well, thank you for the love. I'm feeling it. What denomination is that, by the way? I want to sign up for it.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you get this, and, I just question, well, why are you on my channel?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You must be searching.
And I still advocate, if you really want the separation of church and state, then be separate. Don't have a tax exemption.
No.
Don't be subsidized by the government. Because here's one thing about the government: whatever it subsidizes, it will eventually control, and it's already controlling it. They're both two wings in the same bird.
Well, we started to see this in the last administration. I know exactly what the IRS was doing. I do know of several churches that were actually closed down.
Really?
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah. And, listen, there's nothing that says that you can't make a political opinion from a pulpit. The thing is that the IRS imposed that and an interpretation. It's never been challenged in the courts. And those churches that have challenged it, the IRS quickly reverses itself. So, yeah, and I agree with you. Why do you listen? If you truly believe in something, give of your money. Don't give of your money because you think it's going to get a tax deduction.
Exactly, 100% right.
If you're going to do a tax deduction, then go to my nonprofit. It's tax deductible, fully approved by the IRS. But it's a business. It's not a church. And I just got so tired of. I tell you what really got me, Jeff. I talked about this, was that when everyone
are we going to start seeing crooks hit these mega churches?
Already have.
Have we?
So
if somebody says Joel Osteen got hit for $600,000.
No, he got hit for a lot more than that.
Out of one service?
That was a couple of years ago. And what happened was, that Lakewood has been tried to been robbed over a dozen times. They've now got a special room, a special count room, but that
like
was
a Vegas casino.
it is, and it's actually, in fact, that's who they brought in, was a security consultant from Vegas. It's the same thing now. So yeah, but the problem that we have with the churches is that it's the cash. And by the way, do you know where most of the arrests come from when they make the arrest?
From the clergy.
Yeah, it's typically the pastor's wife.
Yeah.
Or the church secretary. Typically, that's where most of them are arrested. Now, we get pastors.
Somebody's saying that he takes close to 1.5 million in per service.
It's more than that.
Holy crap! Literally.
We fought for some contracts, and they're contracts. They beat us up on the interchange rate, because if you use any kind of credit or debit card, and the debit card, because of the Dodd-Frank Act, which I think they're going to remove. Anyway, I digress. But anyway, if you're using credit debit, they always want you to go online, and they also need to do auto give. And
right.
So, yeah, I mean, if you have a church of 5,000, then you should be able, of a church of 5,000, you should be able to bring in about $3 million a year. They have manuals on this. I know, because I helped write some of them.
Yeah.
And you have a per capita individual who gives. We know by statistics that about 60% of people don't give anything.
Right.
It's on average only about 11% that give regularly, and then you have about 6% that are tithers. Now, the greatest percentage of tithers belong to the Pentecostals.
Oh, absolutely.
And the Word of Faith people. The least givers are the Catholics. The Catholics give the least. And then you've got the Southern Baptists, which in itself is a very powerful lobbying. They don't call themselves a lobbying entity, but they are. Their budgets, just go there and take a look at their budgets.
I can only imagine.
People don't have any idea. When I was in that side of the business, I just got appalled. I got fed up with it, Jeff, because I'm seeing in many cases these individuals living in mansions, and flying around in their jets, their new cars, talking the prosperity message. And then you got the apologist, on the other hand, that tell us that we need to be like paupers, and that to have anything of any type of wealth or anything is, lasciviousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So there you go, folks.
Terrible stuff.
So, and that's kind of the other reason that
Gary Baxter wants a refund.
Hey, don't think I haven't thought about that a few times.
Yeah.
Literally. And again, I don't like it. This is the God spell, and it's part of that God spell. And I didn't like it. I was with the prosperity message for decades. And, the psychology game that they use on this is that you can name it and claim it. Well, that's been a tactic that's been used by charlatans for the Catholic Church in Rome.
Otherwise known as Gab it and grab it.
Yeah. The Catholic Church is the single largest real estate holder of the world. Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me a bit.
Yeah. So, folks.
God called me, but asked you to fund it.
Yeah.
But of course, there's the classic thing about, George Carlin. There's this almighty God. He sits up in heaven. He made everything, owns everything, knows everything. But apparently, he's not very good with money.
Apparently not.
Because he's always needing more.
And so here's the mind game. So you go to Malachi 3, right? Bring the full tithe.
Bring ye all the tithe into the storehouse,
that there may be meat in my house in the time of need. And see if I will not open up the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing upon you that you will not have a room to contain. And the fruit in your vineyard shall not fall upon its time. Yeah. Well, number one, that isn't talking about the 10% that you make. That is a totally different ideology, religion, the whole thing. But here's the thing. You can never find tithing in the New Testament.
Well, the best you got is the given it shall be given unto you, pressed down, shaken together, running over.
And then
shall men give
into
unto your
you.
soul. But we don't go to that part of it.
Well, then you can go to 2 Corinthians 9, right? And it says, by the measure that you give will be measured back to you.
Measured back to
You
you,
know,
yeah.
and then Paul goes into this prayer that by your generous gift, may you always have enough for every meeting, every need, being in no need of any type of health, but it being in, well, that sure the hell ain't working,
Yeah.
because most of the people I see in my subscribers that are hurting, I mean, that scripture isn't working at all.
Well, the biggest one that's used by the name it and claim it is the one in James, right? I wish that you'd prosper.
It's in John, yeah.
Oh, and John, and be in health as your soul
Yeah,
prospers.
yeah, absolutely. And I can just go over and over and again, and I see the people. It finally got to the point when I quit going. I couldn't take it anymore. I'm seeing people that are struggling, and they love God. They truly believe in this redemptive Savior, and they give sacrificially. And year after year, you see no improvement. And when they get the small little things, because really it's their own selves bringing it. But when
Right.
you're depending on someone else to bring it to you, it ain't going to happen. And I got fed up with it, Jeff. I just said, this is nuts. This is vampirism.
That's exactly what it is.
It's not bloodletting, but it's taking the vital energy of these good people. I mean, when I saw families coming in the wintertime and their kids wearing coats, but you see them sacrificially putting money into the plate, and I'm going, and I know
It's
where the
sad.
money is going. I
It's
know where
sad.
it's going. It's going to pay the mortgage, the house payment of the
Sad.
pastor.
It's so sad.
You know, this, and you know, and when I get these people writing me, telling me they're praying for my soul, that I may see the redemptive value of Jesus again, well, you got a little bit more to deal with on me than just simply that. I'm a little smarter than that.
Yep.
And I've been, as I told one woman, I said, you don't know where I've walked. You don't know what bread I've broken and who I've broken bread with. Just like you, Jeff. You have sat in circles where you know. And when I saw this, and folks, I saw it replete. From one end of this country to the other, I found no denomination exempt. I had one pastor, Jeff. Let me tell you this, folks. I'll just tell you a little story. I had one pastor when I first started the company. I was going around the country into churches doing marketing surveys. The best marketing you could do is do it on your own. Actually go into the situations, create your own user groups, and get your focus groups feedback. So I
Yep.
told this pastor that I said, listen, first I had to explain to him the day is coming where all payments going to be made by your telephone, your cell phone. Now, he didn't believe that. That was back in 2010. But then I told him why. I said, listen, this will help down on theft. It's going to be able to allow people to have easier access to give. He says, come back here to my office. And I walked back there, and he says, have a seat. And this guy had the gall, reaches in, unlocks this thing, pulls it out, and puts 2 books in front of me, 2 ledger books. He says, which one you want to see? He said, this is the one I show the church. This is the one that I know what's going on. And I said, you're proud
He
of
was
this?
doing his own offering and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I said, you're proud of this? He says, God hasn't stopped me yet. Hey,
And he won't.
I'm not going to argue with you.
You are of your father, the devil.
So, yeah, folks, you got a little extra. I don't know who's left in the live, but yeah, that's kind of my testimony.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so sad. And, you know, if you really want something interesting, go back and find Jim Baker in that appearance directly after he was having sex with Jessica Hahn, and how he's joking with his buddy, and I forget the other preacher's name, of how they had some great body ministry this afternoon. It was really edifying, and the anointing was really flowing. These guys are throwing out this horrible sexual innuendo back to each other hours after having sex with Jessica Hahn. And that happens all the time,
It does.
everywhere,
It
folks.
does.
It's ubiquitous within the whole movement. Take it from an ex-Pentecostal evangelist.
It is. And so what we do is that we do fill in the void, because as the Bible teaches, and it's really an allegory, a lot of metaphors that people translate in their heads as real stories. And once that happens, then it's reality. There's only one true authorized word of God. It's absolute, and that's the King James. I mean, I've heard that so many times.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that after so many generations, it's like the word Jesus. It was a made-up word that was introduced less than 400 years ago, but today people live and die on the virtual aspect that that word is true, and it holds all the meanings that they have been taught.
There's no other name given among men under heaven whereby we must be saved, Wayne.
Exactly.
The name that never existed until the 17th century.
Yeah, I mean, so
what did everybody before the 17th century do? Well.
Yeah, well, that ain't important. You don't want to know that name. Well, yeah, I do. No, you don't. Well, yeah, I do. All right. And this is how it had explained to me, folks, really. Since you seem to want to know it, it was Iesus. Now, understand how Latin is written and how the E and the I is. I said Zeus? No, I said Iesus.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah. I said, so how's that spelled? Well, you got several different. You can have Eiousus. Isn't that Zeus? No. And you finally come to the conclusion that, listen, if this guy was a Hebrew and a rabbi, he had a rabbinical name, and it wasn't no Greek Latin hybrid. That you could count on. So
yeah.
But
very weird.
But the point is, and I know we're almost 2 hours. Boy, you see, time goes by fast when
it does.
Again, the name has become real.
Absolutely.
And when you start saying that it's not, you're altering people's reality, and they're going to buck that one off.
They are, but it's still the truth, and it's still what I'm here to talk about. And people have this faulty perception. Well, I don't believe it. Well, you don't have to believe in order for something to be true.
No.
Just because you don't believe in gravity doesn't mean you're going to float.
Yeah, that one always does have a way of coming up, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Your belief does not drive reality. Evander Holyfield gave Creflo Dollar $4 million? I never heard of that one, but
the man must be suffering from concussions, I'm telling you.
Well, Evander was a warrior. I mean, he was a great boxer, but
yeah, he was.
I mean, yeah, these athletes give 10% of their contract, 10% of their money, and that's a lot of money.
Yeah. And it's because they listen, I know this sounds crude, but they really do believe and interpret that as they're buying their way into heaven. They're buying their way.
Exactly what it is.
Yeah. It's like, hey, God, I tithe. I did my part.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but listen, the way that Kenneth Copeland and the rest taught it was that, well, you can give God the 10%, but he's told you he'd give you 100-fold return. Well, now
make an investment.
So am I using this as a lottery? Am I using this as a business model? I mean, because technically,
celestial Santa Claus.
I guess technically we could probably file a class action lawsuit against these individuals simply by the fact that I gave thinking that, well, I'm entitled to the 100-fold return. I mean, who wouldn't do that? I mean,
now it does say some 30, some 60, some 100-fold, so you could probably only sue for the 30 because that's all they really promised.
Well, I mean,
I'll take the 30.
I'm going to say a 30x on an ROI. That is great, folks. I'll take that any day of the week. But yeah, and it's not, people say, well,
Wall Street Jesus, the real Bible.
Now, you know what? And I've been right there. I have actually put my hand on that bull right there on the corner of Broad and Wall. So now I never thought about that. The Wall Street Jesus. Yeah. And yeah. So go figure. And then I'll just leave it with this. The one that really got me, and who was it? I'm trying to think who it was. Jerry Savelle? One of them brought out that if you look in Genesis and you look in Isaac, God gave a 1,000-fold return to Isaac.
Wow. I never heard that one.
It's there in Genesis, I want to say 20, 21, somewhere around there.
Craziness.
So, you know, and this is how these people work, and they start propagating this message. We had a place over here that built a $22 million church.
Somebody said that would make a great T-shirt. I don't know what they're talking about. Wall Street Jesus, or
That's pretty cool, though. I like that. What are they talking about?
they just said that would make a great tee.
So, $22 million to build this edifice. And, you know, when I think about this, I'm just going, we lose our minds on this. Because you may have built a $22 million building, but it's going to cost you about $2 million a year to run it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'll tell you some other stories, some other war stories. One of the churches down in Dallas, I'll have to tell you a story. Whoa. So, yeah, I'm really kind of anti, you know, if you're going to give, there's a lot of good organizations out there to give to. If you want to feed the homeless, I always say, don't depend on someone. Do it yourself.
What was the guy in Dallas? Robert Tilton.
Bob Tilton. Yep. They sent his butt out on a rail, didn't they?
They did.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, that's where Rick Shelton graduated from. Bob
No
Tilton's
way.
church. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So.
Interesting stuff. Old times.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, another 2 hours. I hope people.
There we go.
We definitely covered the gamut today.
Yeah, it was interesting stuff. I appreciate your time, and
I appreciate you,
the
buddy.
time of everybody in the chat room. It was a great great talk.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I'm glad you paid us a visit. Appreciate your time. Thank you for watching.
Absolutely, and we'll be back on Wednesday with the midweek report, and of course back here next Sunday as well for the Not Your Normal Sunday show. Visit R. Wayne Steiger's channel, subscribe, and we hope that you like and share both the videos here and there. And we do appreciate all of you. And for R. Wayne Steiger, I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian whistleblower, saying have a great Sunday. Take care, folks.
Bye-bye.
And we will see you soon.